Oh yeah, don't forget your attendance. We're halfway through class, but don't forget that.
Make a difference if you mark in early or 2 hours late?
It'll say it's late, but we know you're here, so the TAs can go through and mark people who are late as on time. So they should be able to change that. So if you are here and you didn't sign in and it's going to mark you as late, go ahead and Slack your relevant TA, one of them, and say, hey, can you mark me not late? Guess technically no, it doesn't matter if you're late, but if you don't... I don't know. I mean, I guess if it's systemic, maybe someone like Jason would be like, hey, why are you always late? But then we'd be like, they're not. They just always don't check in, and then it'd just be a, come on, kind of a thing, you know? So, pride doesn't mean anything. Really, reality is if you're here, you're learning, and that's the most important thing. And as long as you don't have an absence marked, like, 'cause that's where they'll get you, because like, oh, you haven't been to so many classes. Yeah, yeah. That's the way I put it. They say you're not supposed to say that. I'm like, you know what, dude? We're all adults. Their prerogative.
I have a question.
Sure.
So, I was doing an extra small column, and I noticed if I did this extra small column, my border wouldn't appear, but as soon as I changed it to smaller, larger, it would finally appear.
I'll look at it in a moment.
Right now, it's small. Don't have to.
Cool. Yeah. Just sometimes you need like a double check, right? It's the rubber ducking thing.
I never got explained to why we have the duck.
So technically, I didn't ever get explained to me either. But what I've been told from other people is it was the attempt at rubber duck debugging, where you talk to the duck, and as you're talking through, you're like, oh, by the way, I just remember this thing I didn't do, you know. Which is it's a pretty valid technique when you have like a coworker, right? To just talk to them, and half the time you'll be like, hey, blah blah blah, this problem I can't solve, and they'll be like, halfway through the conversation, you'll be like, oh wait, I totally remembered exactly what I didn't do, right? It happens all the time. No. I mean, you can, it'll survive, right? It also, you know, it doesn't talk back, so that's good.
We used to have one of those in one of the old jobs I had. Each had our own office. You could tell when either one of us was upset because listening to scream.
All right. Everyone have a good lunch? Everyone kind of get to relax for 40 minutes? Good enough? Yeah, okay, cool. All right, well, we're going to go into actually building wireframe layouts and building layouts with Bootstrap now. So more realistic layouts than just the columns and the grids. So this will start to address your question, Mr. Trevor, of how you get something that looks like our homework to work with Bootstrap, right? We're going to try it. So this is like an example of what we might be making. And you can see there's all kinds of fun stuff. We have a search box. We have a more complex layout here with images and text. We have a drop-down box that's not working because there's no JavaScript. And we have a nav bar, you know, with all kinds of links. So there's a whole bunch of stuff here that we can build that's relatively easy with Bootstrap. But not totally easy because there's still a lot of work you got to do. But you can do it. So first things first, never forget the CDN link. If you've got all your Bootstrap classes in and you're like, this for sure should work, double check that this CDN link is right, because sometimes you might have pasted it wrong or there might be a typo. I don't know. Stuff happens. So I would always double check that, but that's the first thing. So adding a nav bar, you can see this nav bar component is pretty complex, right? So it's this nav tag. You can actually directly copy this or something very similar from the Bootstrap site or from W3 Schools. So like an example, if you go to W3 Schools, come on Firefox, W3 Schools, Bootstrap navbar, you get some example nav bars that you can literally copy directly into your project. And this is what we've done here for this example. And I'm going to go ahead and share this on Slack. Right? So if you ever want to get started with a Bootstrap navbar, you can see there's a whole bunch of stuff in W3 Schools related to Bootstrap that's just kind of there for you, which makes it really nice and really easy to get started, right? So let's go back to the example. Yeah, obviously these are pretty complicated, so you don't necessarily want to make it all yourself, right? And then here's where the container comes in. So you know how earlier we were talking about how you have the rows, you have it looked like we had 5 rows because we had the header, but we really had 4 because of whatever, we don't include the header in the container. And here's an example of it. The main body goes in the container. Our navbar, our header, totally disassociated with that container. Different classes, different components, nothing about it is in the container at all. And it doesn't need to be. The container can kind of take its space after that nav component. And then here we are going back into our traditional layouts, right? So if I open up the Chrome page again, you can see we start with our first one, our first container right here, which just has 1 row, and it has this card component that we'll look at in a moment, with just the text awesome stories in it. So some more Bootstrap here. We have our layout, okay, which is just a full 12. It's going to take up the whole page, as we can see on that example. But then we have another div for this card, and then an inner div from that with this card body. And these are coming from Bootstrap again. And awesome story is just the text, right? And so that's its own row, its own column, and its own other Bootstrap component altogether, this card component right here. So then we will move into the next row right here, which is just a large 3 is the first column, and that's our image. And then we have a large 9 to take up the rest of the space, and that's our text. Okay? And you can see on this one, the smaller one, it's already wrapping. If I go ahead and make it bigger, now it expands out how we would see it as rows and columns, right? So column 1, image, column 2, the rest of that text. The image column only takes up 3, the rest of the text takes up 9. And here, excuse me, here, right here, you can see it's already wrapping. It looks nice, it's responsive, it's good for mobile. Doesn't matter how small I make it, it still looks pretty good for mobile, right? So it's, again, the mobile responsiveness advantage to Bootstrap. So we have another row, and we have the same thing. It's another image with that image thumbnail. So I believe these as well come from Bootstrap. These are other classes to help you size those images, so these might be useful for you when you're doing your homework 2, which requires Bootstrap. And then, again, 9 width column to just take up the rest of the space. So finally, we have our last row. So this is our 4th row. It just has 1 column of width 12. It has another one of those cards with the card body. In there it has a text center. So this div inside the card body, text center is just another div you can make with another Bootstrap class to center everything inside of it, right? Center all the child components.
Can you combine all those into one div and just give it each, just repeat the classes so you don't have to have so many divs out there?
We'll try it in a moment to verify, because I'm not sure. So these images, they don't have any classes. They're just basic placeholders that you can put whatever you want in here. This is the kind of layout that we're going to be making fairly soon. And I'll show you what your final layout will be for our activity we're going to do, right? So the question was, can we go ahead and get rid of this div and just do the text center? Nope. So what the text center class probably does.
No, not there. Move the class for text center on the same in the same where it says card body.
Oh, in the card body. Okay. Maybe. Depends on what the card body classes have on them. Yep, that works. So you could do this if you wanted to cut down on the divs. It's possible that you're going to want centered text in one part of the column and not centered text somewhere else, so you might still want that text center div. Depends on how you want your layout to look, right? So you may not want everything centered, in which case you can't put it there on the card body or everything's going to be centered. So this card component, let's take a look at it. Firefox is just... I'm trying to use Firefox too, and it's just not as intuitive as Chrome. It really sucks. So here's an example of this little card, right? So you can see you just have a div card. You can give it a width. You can do all kinds of stuff, and then there's a card body, which is got its own special CSS properties to it. Allows you to change things up. There's an explanation on the card and exactly what it is. It's just a flexible container with a bunch of different options and stuff that you can use to make things look really nice, right? I'll go ahead and select this link out. You might use cards a lot, you might not. Depends on how you do your kind of layouts. Alright. So, any questions on this Bootstrap, this HTML code with Bootstrap that we see here? No? Okay. I'm going to go ahead and open up and show you what you're going to be creating. Let me just pop it open in Chrome. Alright. So this is the basic layout that we're going to be making for our exercise here. It's not too bad because it's not got a bunch of nested stuff, but you'll notice that if I make it smaller and I change like the size of the window, that things will automatically change. Now granted, you get that free with Bootstrap, but there's going to be a little bit of work that's going to have to be done to make it work exactly like this, right? So we'll go ahead and slack out the instructions for everyone, and I'll open it up on here. But basically got 30 minutes. You can go ahead and work in pairs. It's cool. You're going to use Bootstrap to make this kind of a design. Okay, so let me slack out the relevant information. And this link right here, I will go ahead and, oh no, card layout design. Let me make sure I get that link up too. You guys don't have any HTML to start with? Like it's probably be better to slack out the instructions and I'll just have the layout up on the screen so that you can see it. Oh, you sent out the picture? Cool. Well, here's the picture as well. This layout isn't in that activities repo, I guess. We didn't include it. It's probably extra content or something. Oh, it's in there? Cool. Cool. So notice you have a few things. You have a nav bar, an about me. You have some column-looking stuff with an image and a card, obviously. So there's a lot you have to do here to really play with Bootstrap. Those links I sent out will be helpful to help you start. The card one and the navbar one, so feel free to use those as well. And yeah.
Is that part of an activity number?
Oh yeah, this is activity 16. Sorry, 16 card layout. So for those of you using the GitLab repo, that's where you're going to want to look. Will slacked it out, so it's out there, and then I have it on the screen here for you. So would you rather have this, or would you rather have the instructions? Anyone? This? Alright, I'll leave this.
This is what it should look like. There's some errors on the,
Oh, mine's all wrong?
yeah.
Great.
Well, no, I fixed it, like, manually, but,
Okay.
yeah, like, if you open the file, you get a bunch of, issues with, like, especially, like, the now portion of it. So
Resend me that fixed code.
Yeah.
So apparently this code is full of a bunch of errors, which makes sense why it looks so weird. I was wondering that, but we're gonna get the fixed code, and I will update it so you can see the real example.
Right. Brand new one.
This one's wrong. I'm getting the updated code for you because it's jacked up. Cool, thank you.
Yeah, I did. The only the main thing was the nav because the nav items aren't showing, but I just did some added some margin to the container just so it kind of sits down nice and pretty.
Cool, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I don't know if we can we push to the GitHub repo? Like if we
The GitLab?
or no the GitHub. So GitHub has like all the class content.
Oh, you can open a pull request.
Okay, I'll do that.
So you can open a PR.
So,
Here's the fixed version. This is the one you guys want. Yeah, I would do that. If you crush it in, it should go to the collapsing one automatically, but let's see if this was updated. Cool. Try to get similar, but yeah, see, so if you bring it in, it should automatically go to the collapsible.
Oh, it's all one container. Try it yourself. It's only that's only a snapshot. That didn't seem like it. Try it yourself. Yeah, I'll give you like a sample.
JavaScript? Yeah. Which we don't have the link to yet, but next week we're gonna start working with it. Monday, Wednesday. Which is good, man. JavaScript's the shit. Yeah. Depends on how you view it. It is. No, it's pretty simple as far as languages go. It's really good until you start getting into complicated software, then it's not anymore. But that's beyond what we're gonna get into the class. So.
Oh, it is?
Wait, two copies of it. Yeah, because you copied the three.
Oh, it is
repositories.
3, look. What?
And I'm using 4. Get out of here. You said 4.4 and above.
I didn't even see the 3.3. Why is it outdated? You think that they update? Yeah. I'm not gonna get this. Yeah, but here's the actual one.
There's different styles.
Oh, wait. Alright, let's see what this looks like. Okay, cool. Gotta have to play again.
Yeah, as soon as I saw that, it just like I opened it and then this was like a spam tab or something. Like, okay.
Yeah.
Decent work, man.
It looked weird because I was like, why is there a navbar with nothing and everything was like looking at
Yep.
But whatever.
Yeah.
Get rid of one and then
Right. Yes, it definitely works.
In the Bootstrap website, this is its own component, and it shows you how to put pictures, or images rather, next to.
Oh, we're still doing the bar.
Oh, are you?
Yeah. Alright, so we're done with that part then. So the second one would be, let's say we do the paragraph tag. That's trying to figure out how to do this column. What's that called? How do they get the paragraph?
Oh, this?
Yeah.
Well, I would treat this as 2 columns. This would be one. This would be another.
One row, but this column is this is like a column of this column or
Well, also notice how there's a lot of white space on the left and right sides. So use container. This container gives extra margin on the sides. So picture this as being in a container.
You do a container and then you do row and row. You would do row and then
row.
Yeah, right. Yep.
side. Container, row, column.
Yeah, and you can tell too, like, since this kind of sits above this text here, it kind of it sits in the same row. If About Me was on its own row, this would be pushed down a little bit.
Okay. Let's see what happens here. Yep, okay, let's do it. Where would you specify the wait? So you do row, right? Just literally just do classic row, and then you go down and then you go to column. Column is small. So would it be 3 columns then? If your photo or 1? So if you column.
You could do that. I would go to the Bootstrap site and see how this gets rendered.
So is this an image card or what?
I think it's called you just search for like images. Because cards are a bit different. So
Okay, so it's an image card there.
should be an example there with like some text. Yep.
It's got it. Cool. All right. So then. It's called
I got the same laptop as JJ.
Does he have the Oryx Pro?
He has the System 76. I don't know what model though.
Yeah, since I'm a big Linux user, I wanted to get something more dedicated to it.
Yeah.
And my other machine's a Dell that I put Linux on, but it was kind of crapping out. It's like 6 years old, so
Yeah.
I upgraded. And this thing's actually doing a lot better today at home, probably because it was hot. The fans were so loud when I was doing recording and streaming. You can barely hear it today. I mean, they're still loud, right? But they're not like what they were when
I mean, it's a big laptop too, so it's probably got its own dedicated graphics and everything.
Oh yeah, it does. It's a really nice GTX card in it. So.
Oh, you're on CSS. I'm looking at the actual structure.
Yeah, I actually I went out and bought a 2018 MacBook Pro. Spent like $3,000 on it. I returned it the next day.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't like it, man. The keyboard is shit.
Yeah.
And then they had those like thermal problems, and I was like,
yeah.
I'm not gonna go through it.
That was the thing. Like, so this one there's a little bit of a premium because they're like a boutique kind of distributor, right? And they build them all by hand. But
Sure.
but even so, this machine there's not a comparable MacBook, and even if you got the best MacBook, it's like
It's almost
$4,000,
it's
$5,000,
almost
$7,000. Okay.
15-inch MacBook Pro,
Shit.
like fully loaded, with an i9 and dedicated graphics.
So the only thing that I don't have an i9, but I know that the MacBooks have the thermal issue, so the i9s get throttled.
Well,
So
they fixed it. But I mean, it's so slim that the process is just gonna get ridiculously hot. There's
Yeah.
almost no way to avoid it.
Yeah.
Because and like they were doing some testing, so at one point the previous model MacBook Pro with just an i7 was outperforming the i9. Yeah, that's how bad it was. What's up, man? That's why I still have my MacBook from 2013.
Don't blame you. Don't blame you.
I don't figure out how to set the nav bar to the right.
Like the nav bar test.
Yeah, it's like that about. Right now I have
You actually need it.
Check the bootstrap to the nav bar and check the
interweb. The interweb.
There's actual documentation for their website, getbootstrap.com.
Yeah, I have that up too. So like, I was trying to find
It's like I have a nav bar, but my buttons are on the left next to
So in Bootstrap 4, it's different because in the previous version you can just use pull right and it'll pull it right. In the new in Bootstrap 4, they have a CSS class called and it's gonna sound kind of strange. ML Auto,
Yeah, that's I keep
which
seeing,
pushes
I found
right.
Somebody typed, oh, that's so,
Yeah,
what does it stand for?
and MR Auto pushes left. And you would think that left, right now. So it's adding margin left, so then it makes it push right. This one adds margin right, pushes it left.
Yeah, 'cause
So
I
this is
saw
what you
that
want.
here somewhere. Like I found somebody posting like examples of how to do it in Bootstrap 4. I'm like, what is this ML Auto? Like,
This is the one.
there we go. Alright, nav bar nav.
That doesn't look right. I tried.
Yeah, there we go. So, boom. Yeah, it looks perfect. That's just the thing.
You have the
You can make it look even better if you push this stuff so it lines up with this. It's actually one line, so
What is?
to push this stuff in the nav bar so it lines up like this.
Oh,
There's
essential.
so inside your nav tag, create another div and use a class of container.
Oh, okay.
Make it look nicer.
Like around the nav bar.
No, inside the nav, but before everything else.
Inside the nav before.
So in your code. Yep. And then all the content flowing down right before the closing nav tab you throw inside line.
For those of you struggling to get stuff pushed to the right, check out this link. It's a
This
hint.
guy here, ML Auto. They changed it in Bootstrap 4.
Well, they have a whole link on auto. They have a whole link on auto margins.
Oh, do they?
That literally shows all of this.
I'm so used to just typing pull right.
What's up, Matt? No, you need to put it as close to the components as you can get them. As close to those links as those the list as you can get it. So you should have a list, right, of items. As close as you can get it to that list without being on the individual items. So that's my hint for you.
So remember, it's one row broken into two columns. The framework, right? You have a container with one row, and inside the one row, you have, I put an 8-size column and then it's a 4-size column for the carbon.
Let's see how it looks. Okay. It's a little too far left. Why is it so far left?
It's not.
Hey.
No idea.
That's so weird.
Go back to it. Oh, because are you doing good?
We're gonna spend about 5 more minutes on this, and then we're gonna go over it.
It's a quick fix. I think. Why is it not? I don't know why it's not.
Oh, right now it's blue.
So close yet so long.
You will be saying that your entire career.
It's like all under the internet.
You can't get it to be on the same row as the image?
That's like under the image. Because it's going underneath this, it should be right. So then I want to
In the same row.
So this, yeah, this column should be in the same row. But not
in the column.
Good stuff.
Yeah, just because it makes it really easy to see what's going on. You can see, like, understand the hierarchical relationship.
Yeah, see that fixed it. And it made it way worse.
Then there's something else going on.
Oops.
Is this close enough?
Yeah, I'd say that's pretty good. Yeah.
So this one's all messed up.
I mean, I can see the biggest system code is some, it looks different when I draw it.
Okay, so
See, I get rid of this one.
All right, let's talk about it. I know this was a tough one, everyone, but going over the code will help. All right, so we're just going to spend a couple minutes going over it. If there's any other questions about it, we can cover it, kind of get everything squared away. So the nav bar seems to be one that a lot of people struggled with because moving things to the right is kind of a pain, right? And we didn't have a clear path to do that, so we didn't really get the answer to that for a little bit longer. So hopefully we weren't stuck on it for too long. It was a good example though, because if you are working on this nav bar, you get those links, those header links in the nav bar in, and they're stuck to the left, not to the right. And you spend, we had 30 minutes, right? So you spend 10 minutes trying to move them to the right, move on to something else. At that point, it's time to move on, try to get the rest done, and then come back at the end and see if you can finish it later, right? So don't spend too much time on one thing, and I know it's frustrating. But the secret to that one was this ML Auto, for those who didn't get it. So we have this list, this unordered list that's all of our header links, right? Our navbar links. And there's a bunch of navbar classes in Bootstrap that you can use. Expand, large, which I'm pretty sure is what makes it take up the whole screen. There's the themes too, so there's a dark theme for the navbar. And then there's a special brand class that you can use on like an anchor tag, which is what we were using for that navbar. And eventually you can make that your click to go home or whatever on your page. And then we use some buttons, so you probably didn't have this one, and that's okay. This is a toggle button for when the screen gets too small, and it makes a little hamburger menu that you could eventually click and expand out the window. That's what that would be for. So I wouldn't expect really anyone to have this in there, but you could. And if you did get that far, say you copied it from somewhere that had it, then great, you had it. And then the navbar items. So you have to mark these as collapsible, right? So you got to put them in their own div, and the reason why is if we want that toggle button that opens the menu on smaller screens to work, you need to be able to collapse this unordered list of header items, right? Of nav items. So then finally we have a nav bar nav and an ML auto. We'll push it to the right. And then each one has a nav item, and then the active one is the one that's like highlighted, right? So these are all just nav bar components that you can look up in the nav bar section on the documentation online. Any questions on the nav bar? Cool. So now we go to our container, and we have a row, and it looks like we have only one row on this one. Okay, so all of it could be in the same row. We gave it a margin just so it's a little separated from the nav bar, right? Because you want a little bit of padding, a little bit of margin, so it's not just smashed up against it. Otherwise, you got to do internal padding or internal margins, and it comes a pain. So we just put a margin on the top of our container, so things don't overlap or anything weird like that. And then we have our single row. The About Me section is going to be, oh, we have another row inside of row. I didn't even notice that. So the About Me section is in its own column. It's medium. 8 takes up as much as it needs to, right? But it doesn't need to take up everything. Because we want the card to be on in the same row, right? But inside of that row, we have another sub row because we have that image and we have the text next to that image. So the image is only going to take up 3, and then the text is going to take up 9, and it will subdivide that appropriately. So why don't I open these next to each other so we can play with it a bit? We can kind of see what's going on. All right. So this is collapsed now because I made the nav bar, or I made the screen smaller. If I make it bigger, you'll see that the links up there in the top right, they'll appear. Oh, and here's where they collapse. Now remember, you need that nav bar collapsed, the collapse classes, and you need that button. And that's that button right there, that hamburger button. So the first row is right here, right? It starts with the About Me. It takes up this whole thing. That's one row because the card titles in that row directly is its own column, and then this About Me section has its own column. So when we're talking about our homework, and we have these layouts that we have to make of like subgrids and all that, this is an example of how you would do it. Because the card title is not aligned with this content. So if you line the card title with this content, that would work. That's great, but it's not technically the same as this example, right? Because you can see the card title margin is up here is the same as the About Me. Inside the About Me, which was only 8 of the 12, we had another row, which were these two, split up into a 3 and a 9. And you can see that the 9 here isn't as wide as like it's not even as wide as the 8 is here on the About Me, because it's a subgrid, and that row is divided into its own set of 12 that's only as wide as its parent, right? So that's why we get this nice kind of like split right here that doesn't bleed over to this card or bleed over to the image, right? Yeah, totally. Okay, so here's going to be the main row. It's going to be background, and we'll just make it red. Right? So we'll go one by one. Boom. It's the first row. Okay? So we see where the card is. We can go ahead and I can do a border right on this column. Right. So we can see where the columns divide, right? There's the separation there. And then here in this sub row, we'll go ahead and style this. There's our second row, our inner row. And then lastly, we'll do one more border. Just so we know exactly where the delineation is. A little bit easier to see? Yeah, so that's how these subgrids work, right? And the off-white that's outside of those rows is just your basic container. So even if we wanted to see the container, like where the margins happen on the container, we absolutely could. So why don't we set this background to something bright and easy to see as well? Did I spell that wrong? There must be a background applied to the container already that I can't override or something. Okay, well anyway, the rest of this is the container, and you can see a little bit of margins right here between the About Me and the nav bar. Anyway, any questions on this?
I have to put a line break to the About Me away.
This final code? Yeah, if one of the TAs could select this. Sorry.
I have to put a line break to get the space between my nav bar and my About Me.
You had to put a line break, like right here? The margin didn't work for you?
Yeah, it's not on the top, at least. I mean, I put my About Me in a header.
Ah,
tag.
okay. You didn't put it in its own row or anything?
I put it inside the main row, but in its own column.
Okay, that's fine. As long as it's in a row and in a column and in the container, it should be okay. So it's the container that needs to have that margin top. There just might be some other style applied that was affecting that. It's hard for me to tell without seeing it. But the TAs will slack this out for you so you can see what the final example looks like. Or I can go ahead and just slack out this code. Then you have the highlighted background. So let me just slack that really quick. Alright, that's in the Saturday. You can just open up the snippet, copy it if you want to look at it and see what it looks like. Easy peasy. Any more questions on this before we move on? So there are a couple common questions about Bootstrap that people sometimes have, and we'll just reiterate if those haven't been answered for you yet. So can I reverse the order of the columns? Can I put rows inside of columns, columns inside of rows, so on and so forth? The idea is you need to start with a container and then have a row, and then you can put your columns in that row. Once you have a column established, you can put a row in the column, sure. So you could do like a sub row like we did in this last example. There's a sub row. But the point is, if you have a container, you can't just put a column anywhere willy-nilly. Okay? You should always put your columns inside the row, or you're going to get weird spacing. Things are going to look weird. Do you have to put the rows in a container? Technically not, but you really should, or you're going to get things that you didn't expect to start happening. So always start with a container, then put a row, put your columns inside the rows, and then from there, you can add more rows and more columns inside those rows and so on and so forth. But if you're building a column, it better be directly in a row. Directly in a row. It cannot be nested in another column. It has to be nested in a row. Its parent has to be a row. So again, can I avoid having the container? Sure, but we can't guarantee anything good's going to happen. What if I have columns that go past 12? Again, we can't guarantee anything good's going to happen. Bootstrap's whole rule is you can only have a max of 12, right? So if you have less than 12, that's okay. You'll have white space at the end there where the 12 would exist, right? So if you have 9, you get the extra 3 like we saw in that one example. The Lorem Ipsum one we did right before lunch. We had 3 units of white space, right? So if you do less than 12, great. You'll have the white space there. It may react differently than you would think if you started just randomly adding columns there. So say you have 9 set up, 9 large, right? And you're missing 3. You have 3 white space, and then later you go in and add 2. Like, you might not remember that there's 3 white space, or things might wrap weird, different than you thought. So just be aware when you don't take up the full 12 what it could do. If you go past 12, who knows what's going to happen. Kind of up to the gods at that point, right? So try to stick to the rules of Bootstrap as stringently and strict as you can, right? Like, don't diverge from them. Bootstrap has these rules for a reason, and we want to stick to them. Any questions on this stuff? Cool. Fist 5, how are we feeling on Bootstrap? Now that we've gone through a lot of examples of it, right? Played with it? Getting there? 3s, 4s? Okay, great. It's good to see. We're going to move on. For the last topic, we're going to talk a little bit more about mobile responsiveness. And you're going to have to do this for your homework too. So next Saturday's homework. Remember, tonight's homework is due 11:59. No later than that. And then we're going to take that portfolio that you're building. We'll go ahead and we'll give you the template in case you want to start fresh, right? We'll give you the template that you are trying to build now. And then you're going to make it responsive with mobile web and use Bootstrap and stuff, right? So you have two different versions, the Bootstrap version and then your own version that is just mobile responsive. And we're going to see exactly how you can do that now. So again, this section matters a lot for your homework, so it's pretty important. There are these things called media queries in CSS that some people might have seen by now. The media queries are really what makes Bootstrap tick. They're the things that make it so Bootstrap can like wrap, and it can get smaller and bigger and do all these cool things, because there's certain sizes where you could declare what's going to change, right? So you can say, literally in CSS, I have a body, say the background's yellow. If I have a screen that's less than 1,000 pixels, I want the background to be red. Like, you can do things like that in CSS. There are some rules. One of the most important rules is if you have a CSS declaration and then you want to add a media query declaration, that media query declaration needs to come after the first declaration. And we're going to go through this, don't worry. Like I said, I don't really like slides that much. I don't think it can really help you totally. But I just want to make sure there's nothing good in here that I won't remember to say. Okay, so let's go ahead and I'll pull it up. I will open up the code in Chrome. Alright. So we have this page that is, it looks fine. You can actually in Chrome simulate screens of like phones and stuff. So I can have a Pixel 2 and stuff should start changing. Let me just make sure I've got all of the CSS in there. As I make changes and as it gets smaller, why aren't these changes showing? Let me look at the code. Alright, well we're going to manually shrink things. Okay, there you go. For some reason it wasn't reacting to the phones. Anyway, you'll see as we get smaller, it's going to react differently to the screen size. Okay? So the smaller you get, it changes the background color, kind of changes the formatting. It doesn't look super good, but it is mobile responsive, right? As we get closer to a mobile screen, things start wrapping and looking a little bit different. This is kind of how Bootstrap works, right? So we've already seen how when I change the size, the width of the screen here, Bootstrap wraps and does a bunch of other cool things. We're just doing it manually now. And it's really not too terrible. It's effectively double declarations of your CSS, which kind of sucks, but it's not horrible, right? So, come on. So if I go ahead and open this basic HTML, let me just make sure I open all the files. You can see there's not a lot to it. We have a reset CSS, so we all remember the reset, right? We want that reset in there so we can start from a nice baseline, and we don't have anything weird kind of changing per browser. We don't have any like existing styles kind of messing with things. It's just nice clean baseline. Then we have our own custom style sheet, which has its main content in the sidebar. And those are the IDs. So we have our body, right? It has a certain background color, certain line height, stuff like that. We have this wrapper, which is, again, is just certain sizes. And then we have our main content and our sidebar have their own different styles as well. And then we have this cool media tag. And the media tag basically says, when our screen has a max width of 768 pixels or less, I'm going to change the background color, and I'm going to force the wrapper class to be smaller. So the wrapper class's width was 1024, and now it's going to be shrunk down to 600, which causes the weird wrapping we see. So boom, that was the 768 right when it switched there. We're somewhere less than that right now. We get the different background color, and things kind of change because of that wrapper. It forces some wrapping, okay? So really, the media queries are interesting because they're just like another layer of CSS that you add after your initial declarations, and then you're duplicating whatever you want to change. So the interesting thing about these media queries too is they kind of have the specificity like regular CSS classes. So if I have a body declaration in one style CSS and then I have style 2 with a body declaration, And style 1 declares the background color white. Style 2 declares the background color black. Because the style 2 comes in second, it overwrites the background color. Media queries happen like that too. So the body had more properties. We'll see up here, it had a font size and a line height as well. But because I'm only specifying in the media query that I want the background color to change, that's the only thing that changes. The rest of the stuff stays the same. So if I set a color, and hopefully the color affects everything. If I set a color of red for the text, right? So all the text is red now, and you'll notice it doesn't change, ever. It never changes. But if I go ahead and go into my media query, and I set the color to green when it's below 768 pixels, now it's green, and you'll be able to see that transition. Boop, boop, just like the background color, right? It's pretty cool stuff, huh? So you can basically say, when my screen's a smaller size, I want it to look completely different. You could overwrite every single CSS class you have, every single property. You can make it a totally different website. You just have to have the same HTML elements, right? Because you can't affect those. But you could go nuts and change all kinds of things. So there's a couple of other things, too, to drive home about the media query. One, like I said earlier, this media query declaration has to come after all the rest of your CSS. Now, does it have to come directly after the rest of your CSS? No. Technically, I could do a media query for the body right after the body if I wanted to, but then it's going to be kind of disjointed and kind of weird. So you should basically put your media queries either in their own like CSS sheet, their own file, or put them at the very end of all of your CSS so you can do everything at once, right? Then we have this screen word right here, media screen. There's a few things you can do in media queries. You could say if I'm printing the page, I want the CSS to change. If it's like a screen reader, I want the CSS to change. For the most part, we're going to be using this screen keyword. There's a few other ones too, but screen is basically when it's on my screen, a mobile screen or a desktop, right? So at media and screen, you definitely need those two. And then you can define what actually makes these queries change. Like what happens to cause this new CSS to be applied. That's when we use and then we specify a property. And the max width is 768 pixels. And by max width, we mean it's at most 768. So naturally, anything less than that is at most 768, right? So it'll apply. If I just did width 768, what would happen? It'd have to be exactly 768 pixels, or nothing would happen. And good luck to getting the window to exactly 768 pixels. Have fun with that. Any questions on these media queries? Yeah, what's up?
So if you're trying to specify something with the max width, and you're doing like a media query for a specific, like a iPad, and then you want to do one for an iPhone, which one would have to be first?
I see. That's a good question. So say you have a bunch of different media queries for different sizes, right? That's effectively what you're getting at. Which has to be first? Start with the largest first. So 768's like, say that's a crappy iPad 1 size or something. You're going to want to start with the largest first, because that's going to happen first, technically, right? Whatever one you want to be the most specific. Because if I did this max width of 1024 second, well, anything under 1024 applies to that, right? So technically the 768 one would be overwritten every time. But we can just show this. This background color is going to be blue. And this one's going to be yellow. You all notice that I'm really bad at colors, so I just pick easy colors every single time, right? Yeah, magenta, fuchsia. Okay. So this is the 768. Now we're in the 124. And now we're in the regular, right? So, ooh, I like that. That's good. Yeah, that's the don't view the page on this size. All right. Any other questions on the media queries? Yeah, what's up?
Can you set like a min max?
Can I set like a, what was it?
Like the media screen size, can you set a min max so it only applies this and that, or is that?
Yes. I think you, I'm trying to remember the syntax for it. I think you can. Media query. Yeah, you definitely could.
Doesn't work on not Excel focus. And bidding but not. Like,
Yeah, let's look. Okay.
Don't get my website.
So if I wanted to do min and max, so say this is the sweet spot. Let's just make it 1,000 pixels, right? So we're making it really small. So there should be a flash where it goes back to regular, then goes to our horrible monster, and then back. Yeah, boom, 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 go back and forth. Yeah, make it really terrible. So you need to keep adding ands for the conditions, basically. And that'll help it apply over and over again. But again, if we had this min width of 767, I mean, it'll be overridden by this one, but you may not realize that, oh, min width of 767, I want it to be this horrible blue, right? But then the 768 is actually last, so the specificity rules are going to say that that's going to take precedence, and you'll never get the horrible blue at 767. You know, it's a 1 pixel difference. It's probably not a big deal, but you can imagine if this was supposed to go to 1,000 to 500 pixels, and then this one was 768 and overwrote some of that, yeah, you wouldn't get it. You wouldn't get what you want. Any other questions on this? Cool. I think we have one more activity related to media queries. So we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna bunch these two together. So number 18, I'm gonna go ahead and open and show you what you're gonna be building. If you guys want to slack out the instructions for number 18 already, that'd be great. Let me go ahead and open it. So let's go. Let's open the Chrome. Alright, so this is very similar to what we were just playing with, but you have to make it look nice with media queries, okay? So it can't be all disjointed and weird, it has to scale well, and this is effectively what you want to do with your media queries. So this is what I want you to do. This is going to be pretty much for the remainder of class. Spend a couple of minutes talking to the people around you, discussing these media queries, make sure you've got all the kinks worked out and your understanding of them, and then spend the rest of the time trying to build this, okay? Yeah, so when I drag it,
The unscaled one, like they're not lined up.
yeah, the unscaled one, this horrible one that I have, yeah.
I figured out why I didn't have that top margin on the other one, by the way.
Oh, did you?
Yeah,
Nice.
the container had a MT-4, which adjusted the top margin of the container
Yep.
by 4.
There you go.
There's a class for that, I guess. Style.
And I'll go ahead and
Add more styles to the file, so it's got to add more pattern. Margin to the 2 boxes and the page 4.
and here's our example.
I literally just added it. Let's see the Oh, dude,
Too much.
I made it way too bad. Wow, dude, I made it so much worse.
Right, because you added it straight to the body. You gotta create. You gotta
It
find out.
was just the first test, you know?
Right, you gotta figure out what classes are. So what?
Oh, it's right.
No, right. Alright, so that one. Well, their IPs are
That's what I'm trying to do. Yeah, because they don't come up with this. Hashtag something funny, but they're for some reason I'm not like that. Okay, so the market, what's the market? What's your market? 100%. Padding, I'll do padding.
but it's like not a lot.
Yeah, that still looks exactly the same right here. Yeah, we can add that thing. We have that. Huh. So it's exactly the same.
Mine's out.
Oh, it's like, it's the same. Same font. Sidebar. So I'm starting to
Yeah, I only did it on the main conference.
You create a pull request. Have you cloned up the master branch?
Probably not, no, because you can't push up to it. You gotta fork it.
I see. Okay. I have to figure it out.
Yeah, you have to fork it and clone that and push. It's gonna be a pain in the ass.
Sounds like too much work.
Yeah. I would just open an issue on their GitHub and say, here, this is how I fixed it. If you guys want to check it out.
Okay.
And that'll probably be enough.
Yeah, I'll just because I mean it's just a simple HTML or CSS change. So
Yeah.
okay, cool. Ta-da! Okay, so pretty close, I guess, right? So I can't figure out how why they're not
Too much padding.
too much padding. How do you remove it?
Yeah, but if you have padding, number, tell it smaller than what it's set to right now. Half.
yeah.
Oh, it's just like,
Because it's all turned set to have it. Oh, no, it didn't work. We have too much margin. We have too much margin and padding.
Remember, margin sits outside the border, padding sits inside the border.
so do the time to do us.
Well, use Chrome DevTools. Inspect it. See where the padding is. See where the margin is. It's your best friend.
See the problem? Like, if you go too small of a margin, it starts sitting offset.
Oh, yeah. So,
text in the white background. Oh, it's good.
Start off strong.
I go to 10 for that graph. And they're all working.
Gotta pick the pretty colors, man. People remember those.
I always use like whenever I'm trying to figure out like margin and padding issues. I always use like a border of red or pink.
Yeah.
It like really sticks out to me.
Yeah.
But yeah, I always use like generic colors, and then I go to like other sites and steal their colors if I like it.
Yeah. There's like theme generators online that give you like a color palette.
Yep.
I use those sometimes, but
See, I'm too lazy to sit through and try and pick out colors like that. I'd rather.
I have them generate one for me. Let me tell you.
Oh, yeah?
You can have it where it's like, give me a color palette, and you can just keep clicking the button until you find one you like.
Oh yeah.
It's like, oh, these colors all work together
Yep.
for some reason, right? Because I have no idea about color theory or anything. I don't
me
care
neither.
about it, so
It's like a separate topic in itself. Like
yeah.
like we have standard like certain colors that we can choose for our company website, and it's all about like they're thinking of like the colorblind first, and then everybody else basically.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
So you can only select a certain spectrum of colors. So,
Sure, that makes sense.
Yeah, it doesn't say anything about the pattern.
do you hover over it?
So if I change the pattern with the media query, and then when you download it, it sees that there is no pattern at all. It gives you just negative, like no value for the pattern. And then when you remove the pattern,
Nope, it's the size of the screen.
So,
So mine's 1900 or 1920 or whatever it is. Yeah.
it was the right,
what about in your code? So media query is supposed to be your code.
right under the pattern.
So what class did you have pattern to?
Unless we're supposed to do the wrapper.
I want to make sure
All right. In the essence of time, since we only have 5 minutes left, what I'm going to do is slack out the CSS that works, and I want you to compare that with your CSS and see what the differences are and how this works. This is not an intuitive thing to solve. It's actually a really hard one because layouts really suck. But so I'm going to send you the solved CSS.
No, what would be for the wrapper? It would be for that actual
And I'm also slacking out a video on media queries that you can watch later. And there's a couple other things I want to talk about before everyone leaves if I have the chance.
It's definitely working.
So for this solution, obviously you want to look in the media query. And you want to look at the widths, the width of the content, the margins, and the paddings, and how those change.
So you can see it gives it padding. Because if you scroll up here, and then if you uncheck that padding, so it'll give it the default where you want it. So it's working.
So does anyone have any questions on media queries? Anything else that they're not sure about that they want to ask? What was that?
Put it in like the CSS,
Yeah, you put it in the CSS file.
but like
Do you remember how to link CSS files?
yeah, I have the CSS link. I just don't know like if I was gonna create the class in the HTML, I'd write out the class from the CSS. Or with the media query, do I write it in the same class or?
Yeah, so with the media query, if you have a class wrapper, right? So wrapper is declared in my main CSS. And I would use this in my HTML like so, right? And then my media queries, I redefine wrapper and I change the properties that I want to change with the media. And so everything just uses that same class wrapper, but it changes automatically for you. Oh, the CSS. I gotta get the unsolved. Hold on.
How you link that immediately? Like on my HTML.
Let's see. Hey, you guys are just getting up and going. Jeez. Hold on just a moment for me, please. So, a couple of things. Before everyone goes, please, I'm going to send out a couple of links on viewports. So, viewports are something we didn't get to cover. There's like 10 more minutes of activities. I'm not going to keep you here because it's not super important. You can just read about them. They're pretty simple. And then I'm going to put up, I'll be here till 2:30. We'll all be here till 2:30 if you want to stay. Remember, your homework's due tonight by 11:59. You have to upload it to GitHub and send us your link to your GitHub repo so that we can grade it from there. Any questions on any of the stuff we've seen today? Okay, get out of here.
Get out.
All right, so you still want to see the unsolved next week?
Yeah.
Alright, so the base all starts the same, right? So this stuff's all the same. But like here's the first media query, the 768. What's up, man? Oh, that's so you want to make like a class that's like everything that starts with this. So here, I'll do it in the unsolved. That would be something like the selector for your element, right? And then you do class, caret equals, and then whatever it starts with. So say if it was test, or if you want to do the column, it's call dash, right? And then you could do your CSS from there.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, what's up, man?
Thank you.
Oh yeah, for 320. Yeah. Yeah, no, like some of the solve is like, you know, like this is kind of like the proper way to do it, as opposed to like, I mean, you guys just learned this, so we don't really expect you to know off the bat what it is, but as long as, you know, as long as you resize it and put the figure mimics on screen, that's what we're going to do. So, you know, this will come eventually, but since you're only resizing at one point, you know, it doesn't really make sense to throw this in there. That's someone probably